The black sands of Iwo Jima swallowed boots and stalled tanks. Sulfur clung to the air, a reminder that the very ground was alive with fire beneath the surface. On this island, the most feared weapon was not the thunder of artillery or the roar of bombers. It was a man, a Marine burdened by 70 pounds of steel and gasoline on his back. To Japanese soldiers hidden in tunnels and caves, his silhouette meant only one thing: fire without mercy, a death that came with smoke and suffocation. Imagine stepping off a landing craft, knowing you were already marked for death. Imagine walking across ash where every step slowed you down, while unseen eyes hunted for the tank strapped to your shoulders. That was the fate of the Flamethrower man. And without him, the battle for Iwo Jima could never have been won. Stay with us, because this is not just another story of World War II. This is the untold story of men who carried their own coffins onto the battlefield so others might live. When American Marines first landed on February 19, 1945, what lay before them was not just another island. To military planners, Iwo Jima was only 8 square miles of volcanic rock. But to the Japanese defenders, under the command of General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, it was sacred ground, turned into a fortress of tunnels, bunkers, and concealed guns. For America, capturing the island meant airfields that could bring bombers closer to Tokyo. For Japan, defending it meant fighting to the last man. Kuribayashi refused the old tactic of reckless banzai charges. Instead, he built a labyrinth beneath the earth, 11 miles of tunnels connecting strongholds hidden from sight. Every cave mouth was a trap. Every rise of ground concealed a gun. And in that nightmare, one weapon above all others would determine survival: the flamethrower. It was not just a weapon of war. It was terror itself, a tool that devoured air, stone, and flesh alike. To carry it was to bear immense power and an almost certain death sentence. To face it was to confront the most dreaded fate on the battlefield. And so begins the story of Iwo Jima's flamethrower men. Executioners in the eyes of the enemy, sacrifices in the eyes of their comrades, and forgotten heroes in the eyes of history. The island of Iwo Jima was small, barely 8 square miles in size, but its significance in World War II was enormous. Sitting halfway between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland, it was both a shield and a dagger. From its 3 airfields, Japanese fighters harassed American bombers on their way to Tokyo. To hold it meant protecting the homeland. To lose it meant opening the skies to devastation. By early 1945, American forces had been advancing across the Pacific in a brutal island-hopping campaign. Saipan, Guam, and Tinian had already fallen, each one a step closer to Japan. Now, Iwo Jima stood in the path, an ugly volcanic rock that had no farms, no cities, and no natural beauty, but carried immense military value. The Marines who saw it for the first time described it as an alien world. The beaches were not golden sands, but fine black ash that swallowed their boots. The air reeked of sulfur. It was as if the island itself was warning intruders to turn back. For the United States, the island represented opportunity. Its location meant damaged bombers returning from raids on Japan could land safely instead of crashing into the sea. It meant fighter escorts could launch from its airstrips, extending their reach over the enemy's capital. For American planners, Iwo Jima was a stepping stone, a place to secure before the inevitable invasion of Japan. But for the Japanese, it was something more. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the commander entrusted with defending the island, understood that Iwo Jima could not be saved. The American fleet was too powerful, its air dominance too complete. Yet he believed the island could still serve a purpose: to bleed the Marines so badly that America might hesitate before striking the Japanese mainland. His goal was not victory, but sacrifice, measured not in ground gained, but in American lives lost. Kuribayashi studied the failures of previous battles. At Saipan and Tarawa, Japanese soldiers had charged recklessly in banzai assaults, rushing into machine gun fire and dying in waves. The waste of life appalled him. He knew the Americans had come to expect such futile charges, and he would not oblige them. Instead, he crafted a new form of defense, one that relied on patience, discipline, and the earth itself. Under his command, engineers and soldiers transformed the island into a fortress unlike any the Marines had ever faced. More than 11 miles of tunnels were carved into the volcanic rock, linking bunkers, pillboxes, artillery positions, and hidden barracks. Machine guns were mounted behind sliding steel doors that opened for only seconds to fire, then vanished into the hillside once more. Mortars and artillery were concealed beneath layers of rock and camouflage, invisible until the moment they roared to life. The island's natural landscape became part of the defense. Every ridge, every cave mouth, every rise of land was turned into a killing zone. From Mount Suribachi, the dormant volcano that loomed over the beaches, Japanese spotters could see every movement of the invasion force. The black sands themselves, soft and treacherous, slowed Marines as they tried to advance, turning them into easy targets. Kuribayashi's orders were clear. Every soldier would fight to the death. Out of his 21,000 defenders, he expected none to survive. Yet he did not want them to die in vain. Instead of mass charges, he demanded ambushes. Instead of wasting bullets on distant targets, he ordered his men to hold fire until Americans were at point-blank range. Each cave was to be defended until the last man. Each yard of ground was to be paid for with blood. When the Marines landed on February 19th, 1945, they found no opposition on the beaches. The silence was eerie. At Normandy, 2 years earlier, German guns had opened fire the moment landing craft hit the sand. Here, on Iwo Jima, the Americans at first thought they had been spared. They were wrong. Kuribayashi had ordered his men to wait. Only when the beaches were crowded with men and machines did the hills erupt in fire. Artillery shells burst among the landing craft. Machine guns raked across the sand. Mortars fell like rain. The beach became a slaughterhouse in seconds. This was not a battle fought on the surface. It was a battle fought from the earth itself. Marines described the enemy as ghosts, unseen until they struck, then vanishing back into the tunnels. The island seemed alive with death, every shadow hiding a gun, every cave mouth a trap. Unlike the open battlefields of Europe, Iwo Jima offered no place to hide, no shelter from the storm. Kuribayashi's strategy was brutal but effective. He could not win, but he could inflict pain. He turned the island into a place where every step forward for the Marines was earned with blood. And as the days dragged on, the Marines realized they were not just fighting soldiers. They were fighting the island itself. And within this hellish battlefield, one weapon would emerge as both a curse and a salvation: the flamethrower. The Marines who approached Iwo Jima on that gray morning in February 1945 knew it would be difficult, yet nothing in their training had prepared them for what awaited them. The closer the landing craft drew to shore, the more the island revealed its unnatural, forbidding face. Clouds of smoke drifted from Mount Suribachi, the volcanic cone that dominated the southern tip, making it appear as though the mountain itself was alive, watching, waiting. From a distance, the beaches seemed almost manageable, but the illusion vanished the moment boots touched the ground. The black sand was soft, shifting beneath every step. Marines sank to their ankles, dragging their weapons, their packs, and their fear across terrain that fought against them. Tanks and trucks bogged down within yards of the surf, their treads spinning uselessly. Bulldozers meant to clear paths stalled, unable to bite into the ash-like soil. What should have been a beachhead became a graveyard of stalled machines and struggling men. And then, the silence broke. Kuribayashi's hidden artillery opened fire with a suddenness that Marines later compared to a volcano erupting. The ground shook as shells burst among the landing craft, tearing men apart before they even reached shore. Mortars, invisible and relentless, rained down on the beach, striking packed formations of Marines who had nowhere to hide. Machine gun nests, invisible until the moment they fired, swept the sand in deadly arcs. The Marines who had thought they had a foothold realized in horror that they were standing in the middle of a killing field. The Japanese defense was unlike anything the Americans had encountered before. In earlier battles, defenders often placed their artillery on the beach itself, where it could be destroyed by naval bombardment. But Kuribayashi had learned. His guns were hidden in caves, tunneled deep into the rock. Doors of steel, camouflaged with sand and stone, opened for seconds at a time, allowing a burst of fire before slamming shut again. Naval gunfire, no matter how heavy, could not silence them. For every cave destroyed, 3 more seemed to open. Marines soon discovered that victory on Iwo Jima meant not taking ground, but rooting out shadows. The tunnels that laced the island allowed Japanese troops to vanish from one position and reappear behind the Americans an hour later. A pillbox destroyed in the morning could come alive again by afternoon, manned by soldiers who had traveled unseen beneath the ground. The Marines called it a rabbit warren of death. The defenders were not reckless. They did not waste ammunition firing blindly. They waited, they measured, they allowed Marines to come close, to feel safe, and then unleashed sudden, concentrated bursts that cut down entire squads in seconds. Every yard of ground had to be taken twice, once against the defenders and once against the island itself. Psychologically, the effect was devastating. Marines reported the uncanny sensation of being watched at all times, as though the island itself were alive with eyes. The black sand seemed to whisper death. The caves seemed to breathe, and every step forward felt like walking into a trap. For the Japanese defenders, the island was no less a nightmare, though they accepted it willingly. General Kuribayashi had told them plainly that there would be no rescue, no reinforcement, no survival. Each man was expected to die, and they prepared themselves with a grim determination. Food was rationed, water scarce, but discipline remained absolute. Soldiers carved prayers into the stone walls of their tunnels. They left behind diaries that spoke not of hope, but of resolve. One wrote, "We are already ghosts. Our duty is to make the enemy pay." Kuribayashi himself was a man of contradictions. He had studied in the United States years earlier, serving as a military attaché in Washington. He admired American industry, its wealth, and its capacity for war. Privately, he told friends he feared Japan could never truly defeat such a nation. Yet, when his duty called, he returned to Japan and took up arms, determined to resist to the last. On Iwo Jima, he channeled both his respect for the enemy and his loyalty to his homeland into a strategy designed to inflict the maximum possible cost. The Americans, for their part, had not underestimated Iwo Jima. They knew it would be difficult, but even their harshest predictions fell short of reality. Before the invasion, U.S. Navy ships pounded the island with days of bombardment, dropping more than 20,000 tons of shells. The surface was cratered, scarred, and blackened by fire. Planners believed nothing could have survived. Yet when the Marines came ashore, the hidden guns roared to life, proving that the Japanese had been untouched beneath their layers of rock and earth. In the first hours of the landing, confusion reigned. Marines fought desperately to push forward, but the sand swallowed their strength. Casualties mounted quickly. Medics scrambled from one wounded man to the next, dragging them to improvised aid stations that were themselves under fire. Radios crackled with desperate calls for support, but artillery fire drowned out many of the voices. Yet the Marines did not retreat. They pushed forward inch by inch, sometimes advancing no more than a few yards in an entire day. They dug shallow foxholes that collapsed in the sand, offering little protection. They used smoke to cover their movements, though the shifting winds often betrayed them. Above all, they relied on each other, squads clinging together, knowing that survival depended on unity. The island's most imposing feature, Mount Suribachi, became a symbol of the struggle. From its heights, Japanese observers directed fire with deadly accuracy. Every attempt to advance up its slopes met with resistance from caves honeycombed into the rock. To the Marines below, it seemed an impossible task, but they knew it had to fall. Until Suribachi was taken, the beaches could never be safe. Kuribayashi's genius lay not only in his defenses, but in the psychological weight they carried. Every Marine who landed knew that his enemy was unseen, waiting, patient. The knowledge gnawed at the spirit, creating tension that never eased. Soldiers wrote in letters home that they felt as if death lurked beneath their very feet, ready to rise up at any moment. This was the battlefield into which the flamethrower would soon be unleashed, a place where rifles and artillery could not reach, where caves swallowed shells and spat defiance, where shadows fought harder than men. To fight such an enemy, the Marines would need a weapon that could burn the very air inside the tunnels. And so, the flamethrower became not only a tool, but a necessity. Without it, the labyrinth of Iwo Jima might never have been conquered. The battle for Iwo Jima was not decided by tanks or battleships. It was decided by fire. To defeat an enemy that lived beneath the ground, the Marines needed more than rifles or artillery. The tunnels carved by Kuribayashi's men were impervious to bombardment. The pillboxes were built of reinforced concrete, their narrow firing slits invisible until the last moment. Grenades could clear a single room, but not a maze. Mortars rained shells, but the defenders simply retreated deeper underground. The Marines quickly learned that only one weapon could reach into the earth, suffocate its defenders, and leave nothing alive: the flamethrower. At first glance, it looked almost absurd. Two metal cylinders strapped to a man's back, connected by a hose to a nozzle resembling a garden sprayer. But within those cylinders was death itself: pressurized gasoline thickened with chemicals to make it cling, to make it burn hotter, longer, and inescapably. A single burst lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, entire squads could be annihilated. The flames streamed like liquid fire, crawling along walls, dripping from ceilings, searing flesh, and devouring air. Tactically, the use of the weapon was straightforward but brutal. A squad would pin down a bunker with rifle and machine gun fire. Then, crawling low and covered by smoke, a flamethrower operator advanced to within 30 or 40 yards. He raised the nozzle, squeezed the trigger, and unleashed hell. The fire surged into the darkness, filling every corner of a cave or pillbox. Even those not touched by flames suffocated in seconds as oxygen was consumed. Survivors sometimes stumbled out in blind panic, only to be cut down by waiting riflemen. In other cases, satchel charges were tossed in immediately after, collapsing tunnels and sealing the dead inside. The effect on Japanese defenders was immediate and devastating. To them, the flamethrower was not merely a weapon, it was a curse. Artillery could be endured, bullets could be dodged, but fire left no dignity, no hope of survival. Culturally, it carried an additional horror. To die by flame was considered a shameful death in Japanese tradition, a denial of the honor that came with falling in combat. Soldiers swore they would rather take their own lives than face the flames. Many did, detonating grenades against their chests or charging headlong into Marine lines rather than be burned alive. This fear shaped their behavior in battle. Snipers, normally patient and calculating, broke discipline the moment they saw the silhouette of a flamethrower man. Machine gunners shifted their fire instantly. Mortar crews redirected their aim. Even officers instructed their men, kill the flamethrower operator above all others. The twin tanks on his back made him a beacon, a target that drew every eye, every bullet. Veterans recalled that the life expectancy of a flamethrower man, once spotted, could be measured in minutes. For the Marines themselves, carrying the flamethrower was both empowerment and a curse. It gave one man the ability to silence positions that had stalled entire companies. Yet it also painted a bullseye on his back. Operators spoke of the psychological burden, the crushing awareness that every enemy on the battlefield wanted them dead. Some joked grimly that they were carrying their own coffins. Others said the tanks made them feel taller, bulkier, instantly recognizable even in smoke and chaos. The danger was not only from the enemy, the tanks themselves were volatile. A single bullet, well placed, could ignite the fuel, turning the operator into a human torch. Marines described the horror of seeing comrades engulfed in fire, their screams echoing across the battlefield. In some cases, mercy came only from a fellow Marine's rifle, ending the agony quickly. Despite these risks, the flamethrower was indispensable. Entire cave complexes fell because a single man strapped fire to his back and walked forward. Marines relied on them, protected them, and mourned them when they fell. Infantry squads sometimes surrounded flamethrower men, laying down covering fire, but it was rarely enough. Once the enemy saw the tanks, all other targets were ignored. For the Japanese, the weapon was not only feared but hated. Propaganda painted flamethrower operators as demons, inhuman monsters carrying fire into sacred ground. Stories spread of caves turned into ovens, of comrades cooked alive. This dehumanization fed their desperation. Some defenders emerged in suicidal Banzai-style charges, attacking not the Marines in general, but the flamethrower operator specifically. Even when retreat was ordered, many bypassed riflemen to hurl themselves at the man with the tanks. The hatred was so intense that in rare cases where flamethrower men were captured, veterans whispered that they were subjected to special torment, mutilated in revenge for the horrors they inflicted. Official records remain silent on this, but the rumors themselves reveal how deeply the weapon scarred the minds of its victims. And yet, from the American perspective, the flamethrower was not cruelty for its own sake. It was necessity. Without it, the battle would have been lost. Marines trapped before an unbreakable pillbox understood that their lives depended on the man with fire. Veterans later said that in those moments, when caves fell silent under a burst of flame, they felt both relief and guilt. Relief that they had survived. Guilt that survival required such terrible means. On Iwo Jima, the flamethrower became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of the battle itself, brutal, merciless, and essential. A reminder that in war, victory often demands a price paid in blood and fire. The Marines who carried flamethrowers on Iwo Jima were both executioners and condemned men. Their comrades called them heroes, their enemies called them demons, but deep down, they knew the truth. They were sacrifices. The weapon gave them immense power, yet also marked them for death. On the Black Sands, survival for a flamethrower operator was measured not in days, but in minutes. The twin fuel tanks strapped to their backs made them instantly recognizable, even in smoke, even in chaos. Every Japanese sniper, every machine gun, every mortar crew had the same orders. Kill the man with fire first. Veterans remembered the unnerving silence before it happened. A squad would be advancing cautiously, weapons scanning, when suddenly every gun in the area erupted at once, aimed at a single target. Within seconds, the operator was down, his tanks hissing, his comrades dragging his body to cover. The danger was not only the enemies, bullets. The weapon itself was a curse. Pressurized gasoline mixed with thickening agents turned those tanks into walking bombs. A single lucky shot could ignite the fuel, engulfing the operator in an inferno. Marines spoke in hushed voices of seeing friends erupt in flames, running, screaming, collapsing in fire. Some had to be shot by their own comrades, a mercy to end their suffering. These memories scarred the survivors for life. One veteran said, "The worst thing you could see was a man on fire, and on Iwo Jima, we saw it too often." For the operators themselves, the weight was not only physical, but mental. Carrying 70 pounds of steel and fuel was exhausting enough, especially in volcanic ash that swallowed every step. But the heavier weight was the knowledge that they were the #1 target. Every movement felt watched. Every noise felt like a sniper's trigger. One operator admitted after the war, "You felt the crosshairs on you all the time. Even when you couldn't see them, you knew they were there." To ease the burden, flamethrower men rarely worked alone. Each had an assistant, a partner armed with a rifle, tasked with protecting him. But even then, the relationship was unbalanced. The assistant knew his main job was not to fight the enemy, but to keep his friend alive long enough to fire a burst of flame. Many assistants later admitted to the crushing guilt of watching their partner die despite their efforts. The tanks made the operator too visible, too vulnerable. Often, the best the assistant could do was to pick up the weapon and carry it forward after his comrade had fallen. The Japanese hatred of flamethrowers was unmatched. Some defenders ignored entire squads just to focus on the operator. Snipers waited for hours in silence, passing up dozens of easy targets until a flamethrower appeared in their sights. Machine gunners redirected their fire instantly. Mortar teams shifted their aim at the first glint of sunlight on the tanks. Even soldiers in retreat sometimes turned back, charging recklessly, desperate to kill the fire bearer before they withdrew. There were darker stories as well. Rumors spread among Marines that captured flamethrower men were tortured or mutilated by Japanese soldiers in revenge. Official reports rarely confirmed these accounts, but the whispers persisted, adding another layer of fear. Operators knew that if they fell into enemy hands, mercy was unlikely. They were not seen as soldiers, but as monsters. And yet, despite the short life expectancy, despite the terror, flamethrower operators pressed forward. They had no choice. Without them, caves and bunkers could not be cleared. Without them, squads remained pinned down. Entire companies could be stalled by a single machine gun hidden behind a slit of steel. The flamethrower was the only answer, and so men volunteered or were chosen to carry the burden. the paradox of their role weighed heavily on them. They held the power to decide order, but at the cost of their own survival. Comrades spoke of them with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "They lit the way for us," one Marine said, "but most of them didn't make it back." Another admitted, "We tried to protect them, but deep down, we knew we were sending them to their deaths." For the Japanese defenders, the fear of fire broke even their legendary discipline. Entire cave systems collapsed into panic at the sight of a single stream of flame. Soldiers fled through tunnels, coughing and blinded by smoke, often straight into Marine gunfire. Some chose suicide, detonating grenades against their own chests rather than suffocate or burn. Others charged blindly into the open, screaming as they hurled themselves at the flame. The weapon robbed them not only of life, but of choice. This, perhaps, was the deepest tragedy of Iwo Jima. The flamethrower was effective because it stripped away humanity. It reduced men to instincts: fear, rage, survival. It turned the underground fortress into a place of nightmares, where death was not quick or honorable, but suffocating, burning, choking. It left scars not only on the bodies of those who died, but on the minds of those who survived. Veterans carried those scars long after the war. Many refused to speak of what they had seen. Some admitted they could never again look at fire without remembering the screams. For others, the memory was one of guilt. Guilt at surviving when so many operators did not. Guilt at relying on a weapon so brutal. Guilt at the knowledge that victory had been purchased with horror. And yet, history records their sacrifice not as cruelty, but as necessity. Without the flamethrower, Iwo Jima might have dragged on for weeks longer, costing thousands more American lives. Without those men willing to carry the tanks, the Black Sands might have become an American graveyard. They were not demons, nor were they executioners. They were Marines, soldiers caught in a battle where the only way forward was through fire. In the end, the legacy of the flamethrower men is not one of destruction, but of sacrifice. They accepted their fate so their comrades could live. They walked into the fire so others would not have to. And though the world often forgets them, on the Black Sands of Iwo Jima, they burn their story into history. The battle for Iwo Jima remains etched in memory, not for its size, but for its brutality. 8 square miles of volcanic rock became one of the bloodiest battlefields of World War II. Every hill, every cave, every grain of black sand was contested. For the Marines, progress was measured not in miles, but in yards. For the Japanese, resistance was measured not in victories, but in lives willingly sacrificed. And in the heart of that struggle stood the flamethrower men. They were not generals shaping strategy, nor politicians making speeches. They were ordinary young men burdened with an extraordinary weapon. To their comrades, they were lifelines, the only way to break through the concrete and stone. To their enemies, they were monsters, demons carrying fire into sacred ground. But history shows them for what they truly were: soldiers caught in the cruel arithmetic of war, asked to give everything so that others might survive. Their lives were often counted in minutes once they entered the battlefield. Yet in those minutes, they turned the tide of entire battles. Entire tunnel networks, fortresses carved from volcanic stone, and bunkers that no artillery could destroy were silenced by the sudden roar of flame. In that instant, fear changed sides. The defenders who had turned Iwo Jima into a fortress trembled at the fire that poured into their hiding places. The weapon was terrible, yes, but it was also the only key to victory. The cost, however, was immense. The Marines who carried flamethrowers paid with their bodies and their minds. Many died before they could fire a single burst. Others lived only long enough to clear one cave before being cut down. And those who survived carried scars that no metal could heal. They knew they had been sacrifices. They knew their courage was measured not in days or weeks, but in the last burning minutes of their lives. For the Japanese, the flamethrower left wounds of a different kind. It stripped away honor, dignity, and choice. To die by fire was seen as shameful, and many chose suicide over such a fate. Even hardened defenders described the terror of smoke-filling tunnels, of fire crawling along the walls, of comrades clawing at the air in desperation. The weapon crushed not only resistance, but spirit. And yet, when we look back at World War II, we see that the flamethrower men were not symbols of cruelty, but of sacrifice. They did not invent the battlefield, they endured it. They did not choose the weapon. They carried it because their brothers needed them to. They did not seek fear. They bore it so that others might advance. Their story reminds us of the terrible choices war imposes, and the courage of those who face them. The lessons of Iwo Jima echo far beyond the black sands. They remind us that technology may win battles, but it is human beings who bear the burden. They remind us that victory often demands sacrifices that haunt survivors long after the war is over. And they remind us that the ultimate goal of every conflict must be peace, for without peace, the fire consumes us all. Today, as we reflect on the sacrifices made in World War II, we must ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to leave for the generations that follow? A world where fire and fear decide the fate of nations, or a world where justice, independence, and freedom are stronger than any weapon? The men who carried flamethrowers onto Iwo Jima did not live long enough to answer that question, but their sacrifice leaves it to us. We, the inheritors of their courage, must decide whether their fire burns only in memory, or whether it lights a path toward a future without war. So let us remember them, let us honor them, and let us carry forward the lesson that their story has burned into history, that peace is not given, it is fought for, not with weapons of destruction, but with unity, justice, and the determination to never let such horrors consume us again. This was their sacrifice. This is our responsibility. And as we close this story, let us carry with us a simple vow: fight for peace.